Prayed out of prison. At one time the Apostle Peter was in prison. James had been killed with a sword, but Peter was cast into prison to be kept until after Easter. And it was no doubt the intention of those who had incarcerated him to kill him also. But prayer was made without ceasing of the church unto God for him. Acts 12:5. While these prayers were being offered, Peter was sleeping between two soldiers and was bound with two chains. Suddenly an angel came and awakened him, and his chains fell off. Then the angel commanded Peter to follow him, and as Peter did so, the prison doors were opened before them, and soon they were put out in the streets of the city. When the angel departed, Peter could hardly realize that it was true, that he was free again. He concluded, however, to go to another part of the city where the people of God were having a prayer meeting in his behalf. So remarkable was his deliverance that those who had been praying could scarcely believe that it was Peter who was knocking at the door of the gate for admittance. But he soon made known to them how the Lord had sent his angel in earnest in answer to prayer and delivered him out of prison. A few years ago, I received a letter from a relative of my wife's stating that his brother-in-law some time before had been arrested, tried before the courts, and sentenced to the penitentiary for 12 years. He said that a lawyer had offered to make an appeal and have a new trial for the sum of $250, that the relatives were trying to raise that amount of money, and that he had written to me for the purpose of asking my aid to that end. He said further that the man had lived with him for a long time, and that he had attended the trial and did not believe his brother-in-law to be guilty of the charge. In considering the matter, I told my wife that if I knew the man was innocent, I should be glad to help him, but that if he was guilty, he ought to pay the penalty, and that I had little confidence in sending money to lawyers under such circumstances. At that time, we had no way of making further investigation to find out whether or not he was guilty. Consequently, we knelt in prayer, asking the Lord in regard to it. During the time of a short, earnest prayer, 3 scenes came before me. As we arose from prayer, I told my wife that he would not serve his 12 years in prison, for the Lord would deliver him either by pardon or through death. Then I told her of the 3 scenes that came before me while praying. One was of Peter when he was cast into prison, and in answer to prayer was delivered by an angel. The second was of Paul and Silas when they were singing and praising the Lord at midnight in jail at Philippi. And the following things occurred. The Lord sent an earthquake, which caused the prison doors to open. The jailer got saved, and Paul and Silas were set free. The third was of Jesus when he was arrested and brought before the rulers and was delivered through death. We sent some money as requested, and a letter stating that we had but little confidence in having it turned over to this lawyer, and advising the pursuing of a different course. Our advice was not followed. A few months later, we received another letter which said that the money had been paid to the lawyer and that he had left the country. The young man in prison then wrote requesting me to pay him a visit and to do what I could towards his release from prison. I first visited the mayor of the city and some of the officers who knew the young man where he remained in jail before his trial. They all said that he was a good Christian young man and that they did not believe him guilty of the charge, as they were well acquainted with the circumstances. I visited the governor, who said he would sign a pardon if the prosecuting attorney and the judge who sentenced him would give their consent. I learned that the prosecuting attorney was dead and that the judge had been bribed, and he refused to consent to the pardon. Going to the prison, I made inquiry as to the character of the young man. The officers stated that he was one of the best prisoners under their charge and that they were very anxious to see him have his freedom. It was the first time I had ever met the young man, and he felt very grateful for the efforts that were being made for his release. The judge warned the governor not to release him. A few months later, this prisoner wrote to me and said, "I wish you good people would pray the Lord deliver me out of this awful hole." His letter was read at one of our meetings, and prayer was offered that he be delivered. In a few days, I received a letter from him written at a prison in another part of the state where he had been transferred. He said that he had received the privileges of a trustee and that he was working in a 50-acre potato field. The Lord had heard and answered prayer according to the young man's request, that he be delivered out of that awful hole. We heard but little from him for 6 months, when he wrote again and said, "I believe that if you will have the praying people at your place pray for me that I receive my freedom from prison, the Lord will hear and answer your prayers." This letter was received late Wednesday evening. That night at our prayer meeting, it was read. and our attention was called to the Lord's delivering Peter and others out of prison in the days of the apostles, to his having helped this young man out of another prison to a place where he could have more liberty, and to his being able to deliver him out of this prison and set him free. We all knelt in earnest prayer. As we arose from prayer, someone said, "I believe that God hears and answers our prayer." There seemed to be a real anointing of the Holy Spirit upon the entire congregation, and one brother leaped and shouted and said, "I know the Lord hears and answers now." We expected to hear from the young man within a few days at least that the Lord had set him free. Early the next morning, he sent us a telegram saying, "I have just received my liberty." The Lord heard and answered our prayers, for which we give him all the praise and glory. A message battling with the waves. A sister in Denmark writes of a peculiar way in which a message was sent over the rough seas to its proper destination. She says, "The fishermen were returning from their day's toil out on the deep, and were busy drawing their boats ashore. One by one they returned to their respective homes, taking with them a part of their day's catch. Walking along the seashore, one man noticed at the water's edge something which apparently had been washed ashore. At first he thought to pass it by, but something seemed to captivate him, and he stopped to investigate. It was a dark bottle of about a quart size, and was covered with seaweed and moss, which it had gathered from its long journey. He gave the bottle a kick, breaking it, and to his surprise he found that it contained on a small sheet of paper the following message, written in Danish: "To the Church of God at Lokeen, Denmark. Fight the good fight of faith. Be true a little while yet, for Jesus is coming soon. All is well. I am decided to live and die for the truth. And to you, Brother Carl Christensen, do I send special greetings as elder of the church. Be true, your humble brother in the Lord. Morris C. Johnson." The man was surprised, for although not a friend of the truth, he recognized the message as being from the well-known missionary who had labored among them the greater part of the winter, and who a few months before had left for his home in America. The news regarding the bottle found at the seashore was soon known all over the fishing village, and soon the message was in the hands of the elder. Many questions and expressions like this were heard from all around. Is it possible that this has come all the way from England? Is it Brother Johnson's own handwriting? I cannot believe until I see for myself. It is surely a miracle, etc. Brother Johnson had thrown the bottle overboard as he was nearing the coast of England on his way to America. This was in the early part of the month of May. As he did so, he breathed a prayer, asking God to convey the message to the little church that he loved so dearly. There are hundreds of seaports on the English and other European shores, and there are thousands of miles of sea coast. The little bottle was on its rough voyage over the North Sea for over 3 months, but it did not rest until it reached its destination. The people of God rejoiced when they heard the encouraging words from their beloved minister, and they praised and thanked God when they saw the working of his mighty hand, which controls even the wind and the waves. Some months afterward, I have the privilege of hearing Brother Johnson tell of his experience on board the ship and of his throwing overboard the bottle containing the message. An experiment with miserable feelings. There are people who fret and worry and have a deal of unnecessary trouble when the fault lies at their own door. Were they to put forth as great an effort to get the victory and keep it as they do in petting their troubles, there would be a wonderful change, and the enemy of souls would be defeated. A few years ago, I met a brother who was weighted down with troubles and sorrows much more than with the glory of God. He spent much time mourning over his trials and temptations until his lot really seemed to be a sad one. During my Christian experience, I had been having sweeping victory over the powers of the enemy, even through the severe trials and temptations, because I kept my eyes stayed upon the Lord and looked for victory instead of trials. In considering the case of the brother, although it was in the early days of my gospel work, I concluded that if people were in such a condition, it was their own fault, and that I could feel as bad as anybody if I so desired. I concluded to make an experiment, but first asked the Lord not to permit me to fall into the hands of the devil. I had nothing whatever to feel bad about, but threw myself on a couch and began to sigh and groan and tried to feel bad over something. At first, I could not think of anything to disturb my peace, but it was only a few minutes until I really did begin to feel miserable. Somebody came into the room and desired to know if I was in trouble, but I turned away and would not answer. It was not long after the person left the room until I was feeling miserable enough to weep and moan and even bewail my condition. Someone else came and made inquiry concerning my troubles, but I refused to answer. This made me feel worse than ever. I then went to my room, fastened the door, and began to call mightily upon God for deliverance from such a condition. I had to put forth a strong effort and take God at His word to gain the victory over the powers of Satan. I there learned the lesson that anyone can feel bad and have a sorrowful time, whether or not he really has anything to feel bad about. But I never had a desire to repeat the experiment. I have also learned that God does not only have power to deliver one from such a condition, but can keep the soul filled with the glory, even through the most severe testings.